So far on this tour, we'd had 4 pretty good days of cycling. In this week's episode, the shite gets real. On paper, the route from Inverston to Ullapool wasn't too tough. Just 44 miles with 2,700 feet of climbing. Compared to the Seattle area, that was nothing. But when we got up in the morning and looked outside, things looked scary. So we went downstairs and had a full Scottish breakfast, and after that, things had perked up. So we loaded our bags onto our bikes and sallied forth. We had decided the day before that we didn't want to go back over the bridge, so we instead took A837 to Invercastle and rejoined our route there. We had little bits of blue sky, but mostly it was windy and raining, the Scottish weather that we had been warned about since we started planning this trip.
The wind, the rain, the fun.
As we kept climbing, it got windier and colder and wetter. When it's windy enough to put whitecaps on the waves on a lake, then it's windy enough for hail. So I think we're at the top of this, or at least pretty close to the top. We just had hail a couple hundred yards back, and we had to kind of hunker down and try to keep from getting our faces flayed. But hopefully we're almost halfway. It's been a hard day. About 25 miles in, we got to the small town of, well, I can't pronounce it. But they had a restaurant there, and it was dry inside. I was a little frozen by now, but a hot bowl of chili helped. We watched the rain for a bit while we warmed up and dried out. Then we put on more clothes and started up again. Another couple of miles further on, we turned south, and the wind was a little less painful. And when we turned again at the top of Loch Broom, we even had a tailwind. Of course, past this was where the tough hills came back. The sun came out for a bit when we got to our B&B. And once we got settled, Carol and I walked into town, picked up a pizza from a food truck, and joined Jeff at the pub near his hotel to eat. Now, before you freak out about that 80 miles thing, let me explain. The first part of this day was a boat ride to the Outer Hebrides. The Outer Hebrides are composed of the islands of Lewis, Harris, North Uist, South Uist, and Barra. Our plan was to bike their length. Our mistake was that we were going to bike them from north to south. The day would thus begin with a somewhat choppy 57-mile ferry trip from Ullapool to Stornoway. From there, we would bike up to our B&B in the port of Ness, at the top of the Isle of Lewis. We left our Ullapool B&B after a little breakfast and met Jeff to check in for the ferry. They put us in this cozy cubicle where we could wait, and soon we watched as the boat came in. We managed to get on board and secure our bikes. Then we went up into the passenger lounge, where we got decent seats to watch as we left the harbor. As I said, it was a wet, bumpy crossing, but since we're all used to being on boats, it didn't bother us too much. We passed the trip reading and eating lunch, and soon we were in Stornoway. After a few minutes to regroup, we headed out into the traffic on our route, up the long climb to the island's windy center. The wind was a real, well, it was tough. It took us over 2 hours just to get to Barbas, the halfway point. So when Carol and I found out that there was a bus coming and that it could carry our bikes, we opted for that. This is what we do with insufficient funds.
The bus.
The bus. I feel a little guilty about Jeff going ahead and not knowing that we're on the bus, but we're on the bus. As Ken Kesey supposedly said, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. We were so happy to get into our B&B, but we also still needed supplies, so I left Carol with the fire, and I got back on my bike and rode back to the closest store. I got some stuff to make dinner for the next day's breakfast, then headed back, expecting to run into Jeff.
Brilliant.
He got to the B&B soon after me, however, and we all recounted our adventures over spaghetti and wine. Day 8 was our first day off on the tour, and boy did we need it. We spent much of the day doing laundry, but did manage to go out into the cold, windy morning for a walk on the beach. Of course, this being Scotland, one does not just walk to the beach. You have to climb over dunes or over rocks. Carol took the low road and I took the high road, but we all got to the ocean about the same time. Carol, of course, had to see how cold the water really was, and then she had to get her feet in it. It had turned into a pleasant day when we headed back to the B&B, with less wind now, but it was coming from the south. That was a harbinger for what was to come. In the evening, we walked down to the port to look at the little harbor there.
Probably in somebody's backyard, so I'm not going to find it.
Then ate dinner at a very nice place that looked out over the sea before walking back to the B&B and turning in for the night. Next week, the ugly. See you then.